Okay, and I think we're recording. Awesome. Well, Maria, thanks so much for being here again. Do you want to give me a little bit of background about who you are and kind of your work in this community?
Yeah. So I came here in 2012. I went to UCSC. I was a transfer student from another UC actually. And then I kind of stayed. um, I mean, I have gone back and forth. I've traveled a bunch and I have a love-hate relationship with Santa Cruz. So sometimes I do leave, but I always find my way back because I do ultimately love it. Um, And as far as like where I'm involved, I started out working at New Leaf and then at United Way. And I worked for a progressive Christian open and affirming club at UCSC called Feast as well. And then what else have I done? Oh, I worked at a couple churches, most recently Greater Purpose Community Church. I also done work outside of the community. I'm working on a podcast right now that's all about sexual and mental and some race stuff as well. Um,
Cool.
Sexual and mental health. Um, yeah,
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, what year are you at UCSC?
I
Or did you
was,
graduate?
well, so I graduated in like end of 2014.
Oh, awesome.
Um, yeah, so I
Yeah,
did anthropology and sociology.
I feel like we may have talked about this once, but
Yeah,
I
maybe.
graduated 2016, and so
Oh,
we
okay.
might have crossed paths at some point.
Yeah.
Well, thank
What
you for
did
all
you
the.
study?
I studied history, so
Okay.
very similar to the
Yeah.
anthrosoc path.
Yeah.
And I was an editor at City on a Hill Press, which
Oh, cool.
was just as crucial in founding of an education as my actual major was in terms of
Mm.
media making and
Yeah.
understanding the nuance of like local politics and how the
Totally.
university operates. But yeah, thanks so much for all the work that you're doing in the community. And just so our viewers know, the way that I come at our relationship, knowing you, Maria, is that I'm, despite not being religious, I'm really into the work that Greater Purpose Community Church does, just because I'm really inspired by the way that interfaith values
Mm.
are used to approach
Yeah.
social justice work and progressive values as they apply to our community. Jumping kind of on to that note, how does your faith inform your values or the work that you do in this community?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question because I'm not even sure I would consider myself that religious or like that, you know, much of a faith person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah, why greater purpose like speaks to me is just that flexibility that we've built into our community and that I find there. For me, like my faith really is just about caring about people and loving everyone and social justice. So I don't really hold like a lot of like Mary being a virgin or like heaven and hell or like any of that stuff. Like that doesn't really, it doesn't resonate with me and it's not something I really believe in. So in that sense, like my faith is maybe different than some other what people might assume faith means. I also find my faith in nature and just the beauty that's around us. I feel really connected to whatever else is out there, being in the ocean or the stars or the trees.
That's beautiful. Yeah. As a personal aside, so like when I grew up in a small, more conservative town, religion to me meant telling you what you're not allowed to do, telling you what you're
Yeah.
not allowed to do in your free time, or who you're not allowed to love.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and moving to Santa Cruz, I actually was one of the things that really pushed me to question my own beliefs
Mm.
was the fact that our interfaith community here has really shown up for houseless individuals, has shown up for the fight for racial
Yeah.
justice, for
Yeah.
queer liberation, and that's like so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. Like, I think religion for me was like rules on rules on rules, and I am not a rule person. I'm like not into that. Yeah, so I didn't even know progressive Christianity was a thing until I came here and found Feast. the progressive Christian group on campus. And at that time, they were the only progressive Christian group out of like 20 some Christian groups on campus. And yeah, they really just became my family. And I learned that I could have a connection to something bigger, I guess, the universe, and still have my liberal progressive views. But I didn't have to compromise either. And that was like a new thing for me. I didn't know that existed, and I was really happy to find that space.
Yeah, that's really awesome that that space exists on campus. And for me, one of the points in my platform that I'm really interested in exploring on the city council is that, we have a need here in our community for people to step up and be compassionate. And there's a network of faith communities that are really willing to do that work. And I'm really eager to, I've scheduled some meetings with folks, but tapping into that network of how we access the energy that already exists in our community and that compassion to better care for the people who are struggling in our communities. And actually, the first time that I went to Christopher Van Hall's, one of his sermons, I think was around an issue of racial injustice or something, because I felt powerless, and I was like, I need to do something. I need to show up for this community in some way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Speaking of racial injustice or racial justice as a whole, one question I wanted to ask you, I've seen that you've posted stuff about your identity as a biracial person in our community, and I was wondering if you could maybe speak to your experience of being biracial in a majority white community that is Santa Cruz.
Yeah. Oh man, I really appreciate
Big
that you asked
question.
this question.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think race in particular is something that Santa Cruz shies away from, and they, in my experience, don't really want to talk about it. Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot more and more, and I grew up somewhere that was not majority white, right? Like I grew up somewhere that was majority Latinx, Hispanic, Mexican folks probably, and even then was still very diverse. Like I remember going to high school and like, albeit everyone had segregated into their own groups, but like everyone was represented. So coming here and falling in love with this place does come with its challenges for me, especially racially. And people assume I'm white for sure, and I have a lot of passing privilege with that. So I definitely have to acknowledge that. But I think I'm privy to hearing on both ends, like from BIPOC folks and from white folks, stories that they wouldn't say in front of the others. So I know that like in my experience, like almost all of my friends of color have moved out of Santa Cruz. And sure, everyone can say it's because of finances, but that's not the only reason. And it is definitely a lot of microaggressions and aggressions in general, just, not even macro ones. Yeah, so I think I've seen race play out really interestingly here. And I think I'm just going to say it. Like, I think Santa Cruz wants to think they're progressive and hippie and love and unity and all that. And in a lot of ways, we are, right? Like, I've seen the immense amount of compassion come out for the fires, right? And people really showing up for others. And at the same time, like, I really want to ask folks, like, why do you think, like, there aren't that many BIPOC folks that live here? And those that do are not in the city. Like, I think that makes a huge statement. Like, I was on a different Zoom call earlier today, and someone's like, towns that have more Black Lives Matter signs than Black folks living in them. And I think Santa Cruz should look at them. We need to look at ourselves and say, why is that the case here? Because that's my experience here. And for folks that say like there isn't racism here, I really would want to challenge them to be like, have you asked any BIPOC folks that question? Because that's not the reality like that I hear and experience. It's really hard sometimes, and it's really hard to find your community because I grew up somewhere that was easy to find, and like that diversity was easy to cultivate. And here it's an uphill battle, like all the time. And I'm just now, like, I think, how many years have I been here? Like 8 years in, and I'm just now like starting to like form my little group of like sacred like folks, you know. Um, yeah, so it's not easy for sure. But I love this place, and so I do like want to see it grow and do better than it is.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing that insight with me. And I think you're on point. You know, coming from a white person who is committed to being as anti-racist as possible, I think that more of our residents and more of our policies that we're putting out needs to really reckon with the fact that, you know, we have this history as a sundown town. We have this history, and as for folks that may not know what a sundown town is the folks that is not safe, or a town that's not safe for people of color, particularly Black folks, historically, after sundown. But, you know, we have this history of literally displacing and pushing out people of color, Chinese communities, Japanese communities, Filipino communities, in the last, you know, 150 years. And then combined with this lack of affordability, and you mentioned that people use affordability as an excuse, and I think you're right, but it also plays into the fact that our culture needs improvement on welcoming Black, Indigenous, and POC folks, as well as we need to make sure that we push forward sustainable policies to actually put our money where our mouth is, in the sense of being able to house and and have like people who work in other places being able to actually afford to live here.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I also really appreciate what you said about the Black Lives Matter signs.
I can't even take credit for that. A friend of mine that I was on a call with earlier said that, and I was like, yes, like I feel this so much. Like
Yeah. And one thing that you know, again, I'm saying this as somebody who has not experienced racism, but it seems that there is this conception among people in Santa Cruz that racism is, you know, violence, like bodily violence against people of color, or racism only exists in things that we are seeing in other places of the country. Whereas, like you mentioned, the micro and macroaggressions, they build up to make this space, this city, an unsafe place for people. And, you know, you and I both went to UCSC. We see how diverse the university is and how diverse the student population is. And then students who live here for 4 years, they leave. And I think that there's a lot of work that we need to do on the city governmental level to make sure that we're retaining the talent and the people who are living here, because we're losing so much in this gap, this racial gap that we have.
Totally. Yeah. Gosh. Yeah. I think too that this notion that racism is violence, or like outward, it enables people to say that they're not racist. And I can say, like, I'm racist. I grew up in a society that taught me racism. Like, I'm racist even towards myself sometimes. Like, you know, it's racism is in all of us. And we live and perpetuate systems that have it in it. So, racism to me is not something that is even an action, it's a mindset, right? Like we were taught this, and now we have to unteach ourselves, and then, like you said, be anti-racist and actively work to undo it at every step of the way. Because even those of us with best intentions like perpetuate it all the time. um, yeah. And I think that goes for a lot of the isms, honestly, you know.
Yeah, or like, yeah, homophobia and sexism and xenophobia. Yeah, and I really like the way that you worded that we have to continually dismantle it within ourselves.
Definitely.
And like, and that, you know, just like we check ourselves as as people trying to combat the wave of racism in our country. I think that that needs to exist on all the levels that we're seeing racism. You know, we
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
we can't just say Black Lives Matter. Like, Black Lives Matter is the minimum.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can't just say
Exactly.
that and then be like, we've absolved ourselves of racism and now we're
Mm-hmm.
done. And the
Yeah.
work continues all the time. Like, the colonial, dismantling colonial systems of oppression, racism, xenophobia, all that
Yeah.
continues every step of the way.
If you're not doing something, I'm sorry, but your words don't mean much, you know? Like, I really gotten to this point where people say they're sorry, and I'm like, okay, great, but like, what are you doing about it? Like, are you going to do it again? Because otherwise, like, your sorry is kind of useless, honestly. Like, I don't have time for your sorry. Like, I want you to do something to change it.
Mm-hmm.
We're past due, like, on so
Yeah.
many levels. Like, the planet, like, yeah, it's all of it.
Yeah. And like, going back real quick to like the fact that I went to UCSC to major in history, historical justice is really important to me, right? And I think
Mm,
that the way that we move through the present is informed by our knowledge of the
mm,
past. So here in Santa Cruz, for instance, in talking to people about the history of our relationship to indigenous folks, or our relationship to Chinatown, like I mentioned,
yeah.
people don't know. And then in
Mm,
saying, well, I don't think Santa Cruz is racist, it's easy to say that when you are not grounded in the reality
yeah.
of our history here. Part of my my beliefs in the way that we should move forward, even if it seems to be a small thing, I feel
Mm,
that we need to do a better job of informing our populace of what happened on this ground. Because
mm,
knowing
yeah.
what happened here, the blood that was spilled, the sweat and tears that went into this soil, we can
Mm,
better acknowledge. I don't like the word reconcile, but
mm,
reparate
mm,
that
mm,
history. Actually
yeah.
put boots to the ground, in the sense of, we want to be better. And I think that people, there's lots of people in Santa Cruz who want to be better,
Yeah.
and we need leaders who will actually do that. But
Yeah.
that leads me to my next question, and this could be my last question. But so for you, what does a progressive vision of Santa Cruz mean, and what specific policies or decisions coming out of City Hall directly impact your life, and maybe
Mm,
what would you like to see change?
yeah. I mean, definitely affordability, like, and not only affordability of rent and housing, but services, wraparound services to create that to be a possibility, right? Like, um, I think to this housing supply, right? Like, um, yeah, I know that there's empty places out there that could be housing folks. Um, and I know that there's students who live in the woods, and not only students, but, a lot of folks. And to me, that's not an acceptable way for a community to operate. Um, like, I would like to not, I would, I want everyone to have a safe place to stay at night and to shower and have a bathroom, to have that dignity, of a place to cry when the sky is orange,
Yeah,
you know? Um,
real radical policies.
yeah, yeah. I think I just want like some basic things. Yeah, which is kind of sad almost that we've gotten to this point, you know? It's pretty heavy sometimes, I think. But yeah, for sure housing is like a huge part of it. And like I said, I kind of alluded to earlier, I think like gentrification, like how do we, and you mentioned like how do we make this accessible for folks like who want to come here? How do we welcome them? How do we retain them? Like, and all of the things that they're going to bring to the table. Um, yeah, I think that's definitely the biggest one. I think too, just creating spaces that are truly safe. And I mean, I kind of like, I don't know about that word, but like as safe as can be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, um, someone was telling me there used to be a lesbian bar down by Shanty Shack. And I was like, why do we not have this anymore? Like, I understand that like Santa Cruz is queer friendly or LGBTQ friendly and like affirming and like it's fine, but I don't know, it's still really meaningful to have those spaces where you can go and just experience just that community, especially if you're a part of that community, obviously. um, I worked at an acai place before, and the manager there like intentionally created a space that was mostly BIPOC folks and mostly queer folks and mostly women. And it wasn't until I was in that space did I realize like how much I needed that. And I just want that more here. I'm not trying to like exclude others or take away anything from anyone else. I'm just saying like equally we need those spaces, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been part of my struggle to find community here, because those spaces are so like underground or like very, very hidden or hard to find or don't exist at all. Um, yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, knowing the history of some things that have been in Santa Cruz and then have left or been pushed out is
Yeah.
really troubling, especially in this COVID-19 pandemic. One of the recovery that's coming out after
Yeah.
the pandemic is over, if and when, is
Yeah.
I'm really concerned about preserving the cultural spirit of Santa Cruz that's already here in terms of the small businesses, the kind of eclectic
Yeah,
vibe we have going on, but
for sure.
also making sure that if we're really going to center equity, we're going to talk about the platitudes of being a place that values social justice, a place that values progressive ideals, then we really need to walk the walk and
Yeah.
incorporate Black and brown people into not only decision making processes but actually create spaces that are just for them.
Yeah.
I you may be familiar of my work with Indigenous communities,
A
and
little bit.
yeah, I was at Standing Rock, and I work with the Lakota People's Law Project, and one of the things that I first approached in getting into the work is that they have decolonized spaces, so spaces that are not for settlers. And that
Yeah.
I met some people that were offended by that, and
Mhm.
I think it's really an important lesson for people to learn as we move through this particular racial justice moment, that in order to reckon with the horrors of our past as a country, we on the local level, on the state level, on every single on the personal level, we need to
Yeah.
create space that's appropriate for those conversations and make people feel included and welcomed in a
Yeah.
way that isn't through the white gaze, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done for sure. um, yeah, and I would extend that too to like people with unstable housing, like
Mm-hmm.
that I think a lot of folks would rather not see that struggle here. And yeah, me too. I want everyone to have somewhere to stay at night. But I don't think the answer is sending them elsewhere, like I really, again, I would want people to talk to those folks and ask them like, what do you need? Like, what are your struggles? Like, I don't know. I think that's another tension point here in Santa Cruz for sure. Like, yeah, there's a lot of butting heads on that one.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a sense too that because something is working well enough, or if something has positive sides to it, that it doesn't need to be improved.
Yeah.
An example, we have systems that exist that aim to care for people who are struggling.
Mm-hmm.
We have a police budget that part of it goes to the patrolling of violent crimes. Part of it goes to doing the tasks that are needed by the police, whereas there are so many different things that we could be funding that could better address the root causes of so many of the systemic issues that you're mentioning in terms or that come from the issues that you're mentioning in
Yeah.
terms of housing insecurity, including substance misuse or mental health crises. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that having a sense of community and compassion, like you said, the radical notion that we should take care of the people who are around us and make sure that they have a place to sleep is a core, it's a core value we should all have, and something I take very seriously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't even, yeah, it's not a radical, it shouldn't be a radical notion, you know? And I mean, I think that's something I've been struggling with during COVID and, you know, all that's ensued since then. But I think like Santa Cruz, like I said, with the fires, right? Like I see such an immense amount of energy and I see that compassion from us. And my hope is that we see that on every issue from all of us. And I know that takes a lot, and I know
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot of energy and time and effort, but I don't want us to wait for a crisis to care for each other, you know? Like, yeah, I hope that we do that every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's, to me, it draws out kind of the comparison of climate change, or an analogy of climate change, of we as a human species, as a nation, and in a lot of parts of the country, we're failing to deal with climate change on a actionable scale, because we really can't comprehend the breadth of this problem. Whereas when something immediate happens, like a
Mm-hmm.
wildfire, we can all mobilize. And I do agree, the compassionate core of our community has really risen up for this crisis and mobilized in a way that shows our capacity.
Yeah.
Um, and if we have people around to remind us that every person is going through their own emergency, and that we need
Mm-hmm.
to adequately respond as a community, in a way that takes care of one another, that we can do incredible things when we're organized,
Yeah,
and when we
totally.
care.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Well, it's getting close to our time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any last thoughts or final passing notes that you'd like to share?
I mean, I think too, like, I want to say, like, to those folks who maybe feel like I've felt in the past, you know, of like, can this community change? Or like, where are my people here? Even though it's taken me this long, like, I just want to tell people, like, there are some amazing people out here doing like badass work and are like moving mountains. And like, I just want people to be encouraged to like find those folks and like stick with them, because that's what's helped me. And I'm finally feeling like, okay, I can sustain this, you know? So there is hope, I think. um, but yeah, it's a lot of work. And I think we just have to be willing to get uncomfortable and really take a hard look at ourselves and be wrong. Like, I think humans in general have a hard time being wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
I want us all to just get better, being like, yeah, I fucked up. Like, it's okay. Like, I'm gonna do better next time. Like, I'm gonna learn and grow, and that's it. I'm sorry. And I'll show
Uh,
that through my actions, you know?
Yeah, it's if a whole line of people falls down, it's easier to get us all up if we lend a hand. I'm
Totally.
mixing metaphors a little bit, but we're it's easier to rise when we support each other, and
Totally.
when we can come up from the ashes of this current situation.
Yeah. I think too, like, I just want people to know, like, if, in my opinion, like, if you can help others rise, like, you are rising too. Like, it's really hard for me to understand how some people don't see that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like, it's not just you giving a handout. Like, it's not a handout. Like, you're also helping yourself. Like, it goes both ways. It's like a little circle, you know?
A rising tide raises all ships.
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
Every once in a while, a good idiom pops in my head, and I'm like, that's the one. Well, Maria, thanks so much for coming on my
Of
Kelsey
course.
side chat,
Yeah.
whatever I'm gonna brand this as. But I really appreciate you taking the time, and
Yeah.
generally for all the work you do for this community. So thanks
Yeah.
so
Thanks
much.
for having me, and thanks
Yeah.
for creating and making the space, and thank you for, you know, putting yourself in a position to like make some changes. Like, yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah. Together we can, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, thanks so much. And tune back in soon, everybody who's watching this, and
Mhm.
I will continue to have these chats.